Welcome back, South Africa. And yes, if you've been cooking along with us, then you know that we've already started with the first two recipes, which was our cornbread and our picanha and chicken. Now we're getting all porky with our pork shoulder, which is going to be cooked for how long?
It can go as long as you have time for, but definitely more than 3-4 hours. There are people that say for 8 hours. You can sometimes, if you put it in the oven, you close it in foil and you put it in the oven for overnight at a very low temperature. So it just gets better the slower and the softer and the longer you cook it. But I'm going to go with, say, 4 to 6 hours. Okay. We do 6 hours. Again, you can always taste and see how far you've gone. But it will already be edible and nice by 4 hours. But you want it to, literally when you pick up the bone, it should just completely fall apart.
Off. All right then, guys. And to get all the recipe details, do make sure to go to afternoonexpress.co.za. So what exactly are we going to do now?
So to me, this pot came along, the idea, I wanted to make pulled pork for tacos.
Okay.
So I think pulled pork is brilliant because you can put it on anything. You can put it in a bun, you can make sliders with that, you can put it, we're putting it on our breads, you can put it on pop. It's a brilliant thing to make. And we're serving it with a typical crema on top. So it's just sour cream, coriander, and some lime, a little bit of salt. You blitz that all together, fresh coriander, obviously. And then that on top is just beautiful. So the nice thing about this recipe is that you can use the ingredients you have in your cupboard. It doesn't have to be this Mexican flavored or barbecue flavored. You can do Mediterranean, whatever you want to do. So we use pork shoulder. I love pork shoulder, bone in, always more flavor.
Yeah.
It's a very nice meat to work with. Little bit fattening. You can ask your butcher to slice off most of the fat if you want, right?
But the flavor's all in the fat.
But the flavor's all in there. So basically, you have to take the pork and brine it. You don't have to. You can cook it slow. It'll still be nice, but it won't have the same flavor.
True.
So the pork that I got for you guys has now been brining for 2 days. What you want is 200 milliliters of salt and 100 milliliters of sugar.
Okay.
And then 2-3 liters of water. You need to cover the pork. Some pork shoulders are much larger than others. So you make sure that's all mixed, and then you put your pork in there. And then you can flavor it with whatever you want. I flavor it with paprika, with whole onion you put in there as is, with garlic. I've got some lovely bay leaves. I use lime leaves as well. Okay. Optional again. Chili, optional again. You can somehow put all of that in there as well. And then smoked paprika, I love. It gives a lovely flavor. I use it in the brine as well. This all goes into the pork. So all the flavorants that you use in the brine, I double up within the pot. It makes it simple. The only thing you don't add to the pot, no salt.
Of course, because it's been brining.
Yeah. So once you've removed it from the brine after, hopefully you've got time for 2 days, if not at least 24 hours in the fridge in that brine covered. You take it out and then you rinse off all the brine, throw away all the flavorings, you can't reuse it. And you take the pot that you brined it in, you make sure it's nice and clean from all the flavorants and the sugar and the salt. And then you take that pork, rinse it a little bit, you leave it in the water for at least an hour because it needs to extract a little bit of the salt, otherwise it's just too salty.
True.
So we've gone and we've done that already. And I just think it gives an unbelievable flavor. So you can, again, as I say, all the recipes can be cooked here on the stove or in the oven if you don't feel like you want to keep a pot brewing for 6 hours, because that's how long it takes for this pork to go. It'll be edible and nice by 4 hours. But now you've got to make your day. I call it the long breath pot, long awesome pot. Okay. So a nice long breath you're going to take, and it's a day of spending time with family, enjoying sitting back, reading a book in front of a fire. You keep your fire going, not a large fire because you want it to cook very slowly. So you don't need a lot of coals. You literally just need to see a little bit of steam coming out the pot with the lid on, obviously, as well. Cover it in water. Okay. And then the important thing is, this isn't a traditional pot, but you need to keep an eye on it. It goes very slowly, but a lot of the water escapes through steam, and you need to add water if necessary. Okay. But you don't want water in the pot when it's done. Obviously, it needs to cook dry.
Cook down.
So keep an eye on it because it you know, you don't want to burn it. But again, you just eat off the top. It's going to be okay. So yeah.
Well, South Africa, you know that we are always plugging you on. So if you want the recipe details, do make sure to go to afternoonexpress.co.za for the full ingredients list as well as the steps. So now we've got all the other ingredients in here, our onions, our chili, the garlic, and I'm going to go in with the pork, right? And this has already been sitting for an hour to obviously get all that salt extracted. Not all of it, but because you don't want it too salty, like you mentioned, because we're not adding more salt.
My brother even says half an hour is enough.
Okay.
Depends on how much salt you like, but I go for an hour.
Okay, perfect.
But that's not a whole pork shoulder. Obviously, a whole pork shoulder is much larger. We're not that many people, so I don't want to waste. It's very bad to waste. So I asked them for a smaller part, but a smaller part bone in. Again, I work with 2-3 kgs, but a whole one can be quite hefty.
Okay.
So you need a much bigger pot than that, by the way. If you're looking at that part and you're working with the whole shoulder.
Okay, perfect. And like you said, you gave us a tip earlier. When you're cooking, this would be times 3. Well, this is times 3 as in how many people we're going to feed, right? So we just need to figure out. It's a 3 by 3.
Yes. So I think we're working with about 6 people that can eat from that. Yeah.
Perfect.
And no veggies, just meat.
So that's me, myself,
Except
and
for the
I.
onion.
And all right, then I guess all we need to do here is put some water in here and get it cooking on the fire.
Perfect.
Awesome stuff. Now, Martelize, we've just put our pork onto the fire, but you did mention that we need to put the water in only after we've put it on there. How much water would be best?
Yes, I think best is to put the pot on the fire before you put anything in there. It just makes it easier to handle because it's quite a heavy pot. Sure. And I know, contrary to what I said earlier, that you don't put water in a pot, this is to make the pulled pork. So it doesn't act like, it acts like an oven, but it's not from all sides that you get heat. You get heat from the bottom, and it needs to cook low and slow, and you cover it in water. So it doesn't matter which pot you're using, as long as you've covered it in water properly. And then all you need to see is a bit of steam, as I said, from the side. So get it going and cooking, and then lower the temperature to let it just simmer for the rest of the hopefully 6 hours of cooking.
Now, Martelize, we're going on about slow cooking, and one thing I do know for sure is the 3 food cooking, because I know with our families as well, whenever there's a big event and stuff like that, we actually cook the stuff slow in a pot, slow and low. And you also mentioned a couple of stories that you've had, and as a couple of moments that you've had with slow cooking dishes. Can you just fill us in on that?
So I argue that a pot in itself is a slow cooking dish because you can put chicken in the oven and within 40 minutes it's perfect. In a pot you can make it slower, have it absorb better flavor with the potatoes and everything, but 6 hours is real slow. So it's just one of those things. If you've got, for example, a tougher meat, that's just the only way to go about cooking it. Otherwise you're just sitting with this very, very tough, like if you're making a brisket, it needs to go very slow at a low temperature. Otherwise it might be flavorful, but it's inedible almost, very chewy. So that's what you want to do with this cut of pork as well. It just doesn't work if you don't make it nice and slow. But I think it's something all over the world. I think South Africa is obviously not the only place where people make food, maybe not as much as us. It's more tradition for us in a black pot, a nice big belly pot, but I think everywhere you experience that. I've experienced it overseas. I was in Sicily a couple of years ago, and they, for example, love slow cooking, and they've got the most amazing. I wish we could get their tomato products or their tomatoes here. Obviously, it's volcanic ground tomatoes. They've eaten the most beautiful, were planted in the most beautiful soil that we don't always get here. But that's what makes it so successful. So they'll take a piece of beef that you also have to cook nice and slow, or as I'm doing pork, I'm working on a pork neck potjie as well, that you cook and I'm using passata, which is basically a tomato sauce prepared. You can buy that in the shops with some tomato paste and white wine. And that's what they do. And then they cook that pork neck for hours in the oven. They remove it, and then they'll make ravioli. So very plain ravioli with ricotta inside. And they will eat the ravioli for lunch with the sauce from the pork. And then the pork itself is dinner. It's not like us South Africans where we eat everything together. It's interesting, and I think that's maybe why they stay so skinny. Maybe the Italians have an idea that we should be following. But I think that's a lovely way of eating, and I think it's an honest way of eating.
Very true. And I think the one thing I also love about slow cooking in one pot is you can literally chuck everything into one pot. Put it in there, like you said, take some time to relax, let it cook for 6 hours, and probably take the nap that you've needed.
Exactly. And I must say, coming back to my father, his actual favorite pot was a plain lamb green bean pot. And nothing else goes in there except for salt and white pepper or a little bit of vinegar if you want to help the process of the cooking the meat on.
Okay.
But that's all that goes in there. No stock, no grand fancy kind of veggies, no shiitake mushrooms and all that.
Yeah.
Just very, very simple flavor because it's all you need for a pot. And the thing is, with a pot, you can make exactly the same dish in the oven or on the stove. It will not taste the same.
Oh, yes.
Okay, so it'll still be nice.
But
it always tastes different when you've made it in a pot. There's just something about the pot and the process of the fire that gives it a completely unique taste.
Well, South Africa, I definitely hope you're tuned in because these recipes are perfect. The chicken, the pork, all of it sounds so amazing. So you better head on to afternoonexpress.co.za to make sure you get yourself a list of all these ingredients. But for the moment, we've got one little trick up our sleeve, right?
We do. We are making some s'mores.
Okay.
So just something sweet at the end, but it's so simple. It's basically just any bun you want that's sweet, anything that you can put on the fire that's sweet. So I think a brioche bread would work very well as well. But I've chosen hot cross buns because you can find them on the shelf throughout the year. Throughout the year, it's not just an Easter thing anymore. And we did this in Easter. We were barbecuing. And I just thought, let's take a hot cross bun, stuff it with marshmallows, and barbecue it like a braaibroodjie. And it was quite nice. I put some chocolate in there now as well. But that's where I stop, you know.
Well, then, South Africa, you better stay tuned for more of this coming up.